You're sitting across from someone you trusted. They're smiling. They're leaning forward slightly, their eyes wet with what looks like genuine concern. They're telling you that they never meant to hurt you, that they were just scared, that they care about you too much and fear made them do it. They reach across the table. Their hand is open, vulnerable, and you feel it. That ancient pull inside your chest, the one that whispers, "They're suffering. You can fix this. If you just show them enough understanding, enough forgiveness, enough of your goodness, they'll transform." So you take their hand. Within months, you're smaller, quieter. You've apologized for things you didn't do. You've absorbed their chaos and called it compassion. You've watched them weaponize your kindness, turn it into a tool they use to manipulate you further, and you've stayed silent because speaking up would make you the villain in the story they're telling everyone about how you destroyed them. The hand you took was a trap. And the worst part isn't that they deceived you, it's that you let them. Because somewhere along the way, you confused empathy with weakness. You mistook your capacity for understanding as a moral obligation to endure. You built your entire sense of self-worth on the fantasy that your goodness could redeem someone else's darkness. This is the moment we need to discuss. Not because you're broken, but because you've been operating under a catastrophic misunderstanding about power, about virtue, and about what it actually costs to remain sovereign in a world where most people are hunting. The person across the table from you wasn't more sensitive than you. They weren't more wounded. They were simply more willing to weaponize emotion, more willing to blur the line between honesty and manipulation, more willing to understand one fundamental rule that you've never learned. Kindness without boundaries is not virtue. It's a confession of weakness read aloud in a room full of predators. And predators hear confessions. We've been taught something poisonous. We've been conditioned to believe that power and morality are enemies. That to be good, we must be soft. That to be strong, we must be cruel. This is not wisdom. This is a cage disguised as virtue. Niccolò Machiavelli understood something that makes modern people deeply uncomfortable. The man who is loved by everyone is controlled by everyone. Not because love is dangerous, but because unconditional love removes your ability to say no. It removes your capacity to disappoint. It transforms you from a man with agency into a mirror, a reflection of whatever people need you to be. The cost of universal affection is the death of the self. What we need to reframe is this: the kindness that destroys you is not actually kindness, it's abdication. It's cowardice dressed in compassionate language. Real kindness, the kind that matters, has teeth. It has boundaries. It knows when to give and when to withhold. It understands that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for another human being is to refuse them. But that refusal requires you to accept something terrifying. Other people will hate you for it. Not because you're wrong, but because you've taken away their ability to control you through emotional leverage. Watch how this works in reality. The person who never says no becomes the person everyone demands things from. The person who apologizes for everything becomes the person blamed for everything. The person who absorbs every insult, every betrayal, every manipulation becomes the person people practice cruelty on. Not because they're kind, but because they've signaled that there are no consequences. You've built an invitation to your own destruction. The reversal requires you to see your empathy not as a moral asset, but as a strategic liability. Not because empathy is wrong, but because empathy without guardrails is a weapon in someone else's hands. The man who feels everyone's pain becomes paralyzed. The man who understands everyone's perspective becomes incapable of conviction. The man who forgives everything forgives himself for nothing. Machiavelli's actual insight wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. He simply observed that the ruler who worried more about being loved than being respected was deposed. The general who trusted his soldiers more than he trusted strategy was defeated. The diplomat who showed all his cards was outmaneuvered. What Machiavelli was really describing was frame control. The person who maintains their frame, their internal sense of reality, their boundaries, their standards, maintains power. The person who allows others to define their worth, their guilt, their obligations, loses everything. And false kindness is the mechanism by which others redefine your frame. It works like this. You express kindness. They interpret it as weakness. They test you further. You respond with more kindness to prove you're not weak. You've now entered a cycle where the only way to demonstrate strength is to be even softer. You're spiraling downward, and the trap gets tighter with every act of compassion. The exit requires violence. Not physical violence, psychological violence. The kind of clean, surgical severance that comes from understanding that some relationships are not meant to be preserved. Some connections are designed to drain you. Some people are not lost, they're simply predatory, and the only question is whether you'll recognize it before they've consumed everything valuable about you. This is not cynicism, this is hygiene.
Let's speak about the specific mechanisms. How exactly does false kindness destroy your frame, and what do you do instead? Weapon 1. The silence that speaks. The first mistake people make is explaining themselves. They hurt you, and you respond by articulating your pain, your confusion, your need for accountability. You speak, you plead, you reason. This is catastrophic. When you explain yourself to someone who has already decided not to listen, you've done something far worse than waste your breath. You've given them a map of your vulnerabilities. Every word you speak becomes a tool they can use against you later. Every emotion you express becomes material for mockery. Every explanation becomes a confession of how deeply they've affected you. Watch what happens instead when you simply go silent. A man lies to you. You don't respond with anger or hurt. You respond with nothing. You look at him, truly look at him, and then you turn away. You don't explain what you're feeling. You don't demand honesty. You simply withdraw. Your presence, which was once a source of value to him, becomes unavailable. This terrifies people. Silence is not passive, it's a form of total control. It says, without words, you no longer matter enough for me to waste energy on you. It's the psychological equivalent of a medieval castle drawing up its gates, impenetrable, unreactive, sovereign. The person who hurt you will scramble. They'll try to provoke you into explaining, into engaging, into caring enough to respond. They'll escalate. They'll spread stories about you. They'll attempt to make your silence mean something: cruelty, arrogance, heartlessness. They need you to react because your silence has stripped them of their power. But here's what separates the strategist from the victim. The strategist understands that explaining yourself validates the premise that they have the right to demand an explanation. It concedes the frame. It says, what you think about me matters. It doesn't. The moment someone has demonstrated that they will lie to you, manipulate you, or weaponize your vulnerability, they've forfeited the right to your words. Your silence becomes a weapon because it communicates something far more powerful than any explanation could: complete indifference. And indifference is a form of death. This weapon works because it reverses the energy flow. Instead of you chasing them for understanding, now they're chasing you for acknowledgement. They've become the one desperate for a response. The frame has shifted. You're no longer defending, you're simply withdrawing, and that withdrawal is experienced as abandonment.
Weapon 2. The performance of normalcy. The second mistake is allowing your hurt to be visible. You carry the wound like a flag. Everyone can see it. This transforms you from a person with boundaries into a victim, and victims invite further predation. Instead, understand this: those who hurt you must never see the injury. They must see only a man who has moved on, a man who is thriving, a man whose life is so full that their absence is irrelevant. This isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about refusing to perform your trauma for an audience of people who don't deserve to witness it. The tactical implementation is simple. You maintain your routines. You appear healthier than you were before the betrayal. Your social presence increases. You're seen with better people, in better circumstances, engaged in more meaningful work. You're visibly ascending. You're operating at a higher level, and the person who wounded you is now witnessing from below. There's a particular psychological mechanism at work here. When someone betrays you and then watches you thrive, they experience something excruciating: irrelevance. They become haunted by the knowledge that your life improved after they were removed from it. They replay their betrayal differently now, not as an act of power, but as the moment they forfeited something valuable. This is far more devastating than revenge could ever be. The person who saw your tears and felt powerful is now watching you laugh in circles they're excluded from. The architecture of their self-image collapses. If your life got better without them, then perhaps they were never as important as they believed. Perhaps they were simply a liability that you've now shed. This weapon requires patience and absolute commitment. You cannot perform this and simultaneously be secretly hoping they notice. The performance must be real. You must actually be building something worth showing. You must actually be becoming someone who doesn't need them. This means directing your energy toward your own ascension, not toward their reaction to it. It means becoming genuinely indifferent, and that indifference must be visible in how you carry yourself.
Weapon 3: Documentation and Exposure. Now we move into heavier territory. There will be moments when silence and performance are insufficient, when the predator has institutional power, when they're using their position to harm others, when they've escalated beyond personal betrayal into something systemic. In these moments, silence becomes complicity. The counter-strategy is documentation. Not emotional testimony, not performative justice. Pure, cold, verifiable documentation of what actually occurred. Record what can be recorded. Keep written evidence. Establish a timeline. Create an irrefutable archive of reality. You're building a fortress of fact that cannot be argued with, reinterpreted, or narratively dismantled. The power of documentation lies in its impersonality. You're not accusing. You're not explaining how it made you feel. You're not asking for validation. You're simply presenting what happened in sequence with evidence attached. This is vastly more threatening to a liar than any emotional plea could be. A man lies about you publicly. Your response is not to defend yourself or attack him. It's to calmly publish the documentation of the truth. The letters he wrote, the recordings of his words, the timestamps, the witnesses. You present it without commentary, without anger, without any emotional coloration whatsoever. You let the evidence speak. What makes this devastating is that it removes their ability to control the narrative through emotional manipulation. They can't charm their way out of documented facts. They can't make you feel guilty for presenting truth. They can't reframe reality when it's backed by evidence. And crucially, documentation distributes accountability. Once a fact is public, you're no longer alone in holding it.
others see it, others can judge it. The predator's power dissolves because they can no longer control who knows what. This weapon should be deployed carefully, not out of vindictiveness, but out of necessity. Not to punish, but to protect yourself and others. The moment you escalate to exposure, you're saying, this person has moved beyond the realm of personal conflict. They've become a threat to the social order, and the order must know.
Weapon 4. Selective vulnerability. This one seems to contradict the earlier principles, but it doesn't. It refines them. There are people who merit trust. Not because they've proven themselves utterly reliable, no one is, but because they've demonstrated a consistent pattern of respect for your frame. These are the people you choose to be vulnerable with. The mistake most people make is being vulnerable indiscriminately. They spill their depths to anyone who listens. They confess to people with no track record of discretion. They treat emotional openness as a virtue in itself, regardless of audience. This is strategic suicide. Real vulnerability, the kind that builds genuine alliance, is selective. You show your true self to people who have earned it. You maintain walls with everyone else, not out of paranoia, but out of basic self-preservation. Here's how this becomes a weapon. The people around you notice who you trust. They notice that you're careful. They notice that access to your real self is limited and valuable. This scarcity increases your perceived worth. You're not a person who broadcasts their inner world to anyone. You're someone whose approval, whose friendship, whose trust must be earned. And earning respect requires respect. By being selectively vulnerable, you create a hierarchy. There are people in your inner circle who know certain things about you. There are concentric circles of trust beyond that, and there are those outside all circles, the neutral parties and the explicit enemies. Each circle is marked by what you're willing to reveal and what you keep guarded. This structure maintains your frame. It prevents you from being known too completely by people who might use that knowledge as leverage. It ensures that no single person has complete access to your vulnerabilities. The counter-strategy to false kindness is becoming genuinely hard to predict. Not erratic, not emotionally volatile, but strategically opaque. People cannot manipulate what they don't understand, and what they don't understand, they respect.
Weapon 5. The withdrawal of resources. There's a reason this weapon is placed deeper in the sequence. It requires you to have already established your boundaries and frame. It requires courage that only comes after you've practiced the previous weapons. False kindness often manifests as overgiving. You give money when asked. You give time when demanded. You give emotional labor when it's extracted. You've positioned yourself as an available resource, and now you're being consumed. The counter-strategy is complete withdrawal. Not gradual reduction. The predator will simply adjust their manipulation to get whatever drops they can still extract. Complete, immediate withdrawal. The man who relied on your financial support gets nothing. The woman who depended on your presence finds you unavailable. The person who consumed your emotional energy discovers you have none to spare. This is experienced as amputation. It hurts them because they've come to identify your resources as theirs. Your money wasn't just money, it was evidence that you valued them. Your time wasn't just time, it was proof of their importance. Your emotional labor wasn't effort, it was proof of your love. When you withdraw these things, you're not just removing material support, you're removing the entire foundation of their understanding about their worth in your life. This weapon is devastating because it's enacted through absence rather than presence. You don't tell them why you're stopping. You don't announce the withdrawal. You simply become unavailable. The calls go unanswered. The requests for help are met with silence. The pattern they'd come to rely on simply ceases. What happens then is psychological destabilization. They no longer know where they stand with you. They've lost the reliable supply of resources. They're forced to confront that your generosity was conditional after all, which threatens their entire narrative about the relationship.
Weapon 6. Strategic Replacement. This weapon operates on a principle that makes people deeply uncomfortable to acknowledge. People are replaceable. This is true. And the moment the predator understands that you've replaced them, that their loss is being absorbed by others who are more worthy, something breaks in them. The strategic replacement works like this. The person who is extracting from you is watching you invest similar energy in someone else, someone better, someone who respects you, someone who doesn't manipulate or betray. You're not doing this as revenge. You're doing it because you've moved forward, because you've recognized that energy spent on them was wasted, and now you're spending it on someone it won't be. It's the inverse of being forgotten. It's being replaced. For narcissists and manipulators, this is uniquely destructive. They can handle being hated. They can handle being feared. But being made irrelevant, being rendered unnecessary, this attacks the core of their identity. If you can thrive without them, then their power was always an illusion. Their importance was always contingent. They were never truly special. This weapon should not be deployed as a direct message. You don't say, "I've found someone better." You simply become visibly happier with your new circles. You're more engaged, you're glowing, and they can see it. They can see that you've moved on, and worse, that the world you've moved into is richer than the one you shared with them.
Weapon 7. The public frame shift. There's a delicate moment when private conflict becomes public knowledge. Most people handle this terribly. They try to control the narrative by explaining, by defending, by preempting judgment. The strategic alternative is to shift your public frame entirely. Instead of being the person who was wronged, you become the person who learned something. Instead of being a victim, you're someone who made a calculated decision to move on. Your frame in the eyes of the broader community changes from weak to wise. This requires you to never publicly process your pain. When others ask about what happened, you respond with something like, "I learned what I needed to learn from that situation. I'm focused on what's ahead now." You're not suppressing the truth. You're declining to perform victimhood in public. The predator is watching this and experiencing something particular. Their betrayal is not destroying you in the eyes of others. Instead, you're using it as evidence of your judgment, your growth, your capability to move forward. You're narrative jujitsuing their betrayal into your own ascent. And because your frame in public is strong, solid, already established, other people begin to question the predator's version of events. If you were really as damaged as they claim, you wouldn't be thriving. If you were really at fault, you wouldn't be moving so confidently forward. Your strength speaks louder than their accusations. Weapon 8. The surgical exit. This is the final escalation. Sometimes silence isn't enough. Sometimes withdrawal isn't enough. Sometimes you must leave entirely. Not angrily, not dramatically, surgically. You plan your exit, you arrange your affairs, you ensure that the separation is clean and complete. There are no "maybe we can still be friends" moments. There are no lingering connections that leave you vulnerable. You remove yourself entirely from their orbit. This weapon is devastating because it represents total sovereignty. You're not engaging in negotiation. You're not asking permission. You're not seeking understanding or closure. You're simply leaving. Your absence becomes absolute. What makes this powerful is that the predator can no longer reach you. They can no longer influence you. They can no longer extract from you. They're left with only the echo of what they've lost, and that echo grows louder with time. The person who wounded you wakes up one day and realizes you're gone. Not dramatically, not tragically, simply gone. You've moved on so thoroughly that you've become someone they used to know. And in a world where most people remain accessible, where most people continue to feed the relationship in some form, your complete absence is experienced as a death. This is the end game, and it should only be pursued when all previous strategies have failed or proven unnecessary. Now, there's something I need to say that complicates everything we've discussed, and it's essential that you understand it. The weapons work. Silence works. Withdrawal works. Documentation works. All of these strategies will give you control over external circumstances and how others perceive you. You'll regain your frame. You'll establish dominance. You'll be free. But here's the twist that separates actual power from the illusion of it. True power requires accepting loneliness. Not isolation, not bitterness, but a particular kind of solitude that comes from understanding that ultimate sovereignty cannot be shared. The person who has fully reclaimed their frame is by definition a person who cannot be entirely known by anyone. They cannot be fully vulnerable with anyone. They cannot surrender completely to any relationship because surrender is a form of risk, and risk is the price of connection. Most people chase power because they believe it will make them more loved, more accepted, more safe. And then they achieve it and discover that power and intimacy are in fundamental ways antagonistic. The man who maintains perfect frame control cannot be truly intimate. The woman who never allows anyone access to her depths cannot be deeply known. The person who trusts no one will be trusted by no one. The strategist who calculates every move will never experience genuine spontaneity with another human being. This is the cost. It's not that power is bad, it's that power is isolating. And many people who pursue it aggressively are actually fleeing intimacy, using the armor of dominance as an excuse to not risk vulnerability with anyone. So the real question isn't whether you should deploy these weapons. It's whether you understand what you'll become in the process. You'll become someone who cannot be harmed because you cannot be truly touched. You'll become someone who cannot be betrayed because you don't truly belong to anyone. You'll become the strategist, the observer, the master of the game. And the price is that the game becomes your entire world. There's a version of reclaiming your power that doesn't require this total isolation. It's subtler. It requires that you maintain your frame, but you remain open to the possibility of genuine connection with the rare people who honor boundaries and reciprocate respect. It means you're selective, but you're not paranoid. It means you're guarded, but you're not frozen. This is the harder path because it requires discernment. You have to be able to tell the difference between someone who is mildly annoying and someone who is actually predatory. You have to be able to read whether someone is testing your boundaries out of neurosis or out of malice. You have to practice the weapons, but know when to set them down. The person who has truly understood power doesn't wield it constantly. They wield it precisely, and they're willing to be vulnerable with people who've earned it. They've learned that absolute control is actually a trap. It's just a different trap than the false kindness that destroyed them before. Real sovereignty is knowing when to hold and when to release. It's understanding that strength and tenderness are not opposites, they're partners. You can be hard with those who disrespect you and soft with those who honor you. You can be indifferent to the masses and intimately connected to the few. This is the mature use of power. Not the adolescent version where you're constantly proving your dominance, but the adult version where you've moved beyond the need to prove anything to anyone.
Here's what I know about you. You didn't click this video because you wanted motivation. You didn't come here to feel better about yourself. You came here because something inside you has been broken by false kindness. Someone told you they loved you while they dismantled you. Someone told you they needed your help while they extracted everything of value. Someone wove their needs so tightly into your identity that you confused their hunger with your purpose. And now you're asking the question that brought you here. How do I stop letting this happen? The answer isn't complicated. You stop by understanding that kindness without boundaries is not love, it's self-abandonment. You stop by accepting that some people will hate you for maintaining your frame. You stop by becoming willing to be alone if it means being free. The hard truth is this: very few people actually want you to be powerful. They want you to be useful. They want you to be accessible. They want you to remain small enough that they can keep you in orbit around them. The moment you reclaim your power, most of the people in your life will resent you for it. Let them. The people who respect you will celebrate your strength. The people who loved you conditionally will vanish. And in that clearing, where only genuine people remain, you'll understand something crucial. You didn't lose anything. You shed weight. You became lighter. You became dangerous. Not dangerous in the sense of harmful, but dangerous in the sense of unpredictable and autonomous. Dangerous in the sense that no one can take your power from you because they never had it. Dangerous in the sense that you've moved beyond the need for external validation. This is what real freedom feels like. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like quiet certainty. It's the feeling of a man sitting alone in a room, completely at peace with his own company because he's made peace with who he is. It's the feeling of a woman walking away from a situation and feeling no need to explain, defend, or justify. It's the feeling of having standards so clear that you don't even have to communicate them. People either meet them or they find themselves outside your circle. Some of you will use these weapons to reclaim your power, and then you'll use that power cruelly. You'll become the thing you despised. You'll deploy these strategies against people who didn't deserve them. You'll carry your wound like a crown and demand tribute from everyone around you. Don't do that. The point of reclaiming your power is not to inflict on others what was inflicted on you. The point is to become invulnerable to further harm while remaining open to genuine connection. The point is to draw a line that is clear, firm, and permanent. The point is to become someone who cannot be broken because you've already been broken and have rebuilt yourself as something stronger. Some of you will use these principles and find that you have no one left, not because you deployed them correctly, but because you deployed them reflexively at everyone without distinction. You'll have perfect frame control and no one to share it with. This isn't victory. This is defeat dressed in the language of strength. Real strength allows for vulnerability with the right people. Real strength is selective. Real strength knows the difference between a person worth defending against and a person worth defending with. Here's what separates the wise from the merely hard. The wise person has taken these weapons and used them to build something. They've reclaimed their power not as an end in itself, but as a foundation. On that foundation, they've constructed genuine relationships with people who respect the boundaries they've set. They've become selective about who gets access to their time, their money, their emotional labor. And in that selectivity, they've created circumstances where the people who do get access are genuinely valuable. The relationships have depth because they're rationed carefully. You're at the threshold now. You can see the weapons. You understand the mechanics. The question that remains is this: what are you going to do with this knowledge? Will you use it to dominate, or will you use it to liberate yourself?
The answer matters, because one path leads to a life of constant warfare, even after you've won. The other path leads to a life of peace, with the rare and genuine connections that make that peace worth something. The choice, as always, is yours. But choose carefully, because the moment you understand these principles, you cannot unknow them. You cannot return to innocent kindness. You cannot pretend that people aren't calculating. You cannot be soft in the way you were before. You're changed now. You're armed now. And armed people must always decide whether they're going to be warmongers or guardians. Decide wisely. The castle door is closing now. What you do from here is entirely your domain.